I'll call the April 27th meeting of the Common Council to order at 7 p.m. Mr. Baldwin, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Mr. President, I'd be honored to. Would you join me in pledging allegiance to our great nation and our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Seating is limited tonight due to social distancing requirements. The public call-in number is 1-469-998-6201. When prompted, enter the conference ID 342-631-867#. Ms. Lees, would you call the roll?
Mr. Ayer.
Present.
Mr. Boyce.
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Hampton.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor.
Present.
Mr. Schwartz.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Ms. Wiles.
Present.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our April 13th meeting?
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, raise your right hand. I have it. It's 9-0. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 17th special session?
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second to approve the minutes from the special session. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 9-0. Approval of the agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I understand that there's been a request to amend the agenda to move item number 26-04-21 to be the first previously discussed ordinance.
Second that, assuming that's a motion.
It is a motion, yes.
There's a motion to. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Do we need to move it?
Mark seconded.
Mars? I second it. Let's hand vote to amend the agenda. 9-0. Can I have an approval to, a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
Second. Motion to approve the amended agenda. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. Petitions or comments by citizens that are present. Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the council, Mr. Mayor, I'll try to be brief. It looks like you have a little bit of an agenda today. Just stopped by to give you a quick legislative update. It looks like we're done, maybe. We'll probably have to go back and address some overrides, hopefully not too many of them. Interestingly enough, while we concluded session, we recessed. We didn't adjourn. We hadn't gotten all the information we needed for redistricting from the federal government, unsurprisingly. And so in order to handle that, we could not adjourn, or we wouldn't be able to bring ourselves back into session. And so having said that, on April the 30th, we may come back in, or the 29th, we may come back in and address some last-minute items. We might even come back in the May 10th timeframe to address veto overrides and whatnot. In an unprecedented move, the governor sued the Indiana General Assembly today, was in opposition of the veto override on House Bill 1123, which was an adjustment of the governor's powers as it relates to emergency orders and some other items, with the legislature being able to come back into session with a certain set of specific rules and guidelines associated with that coming back into session. The governor vetoed it. We overrode the veto, and there's now a lawsuit. Interestingly enough, the choice of jurisdiction was in Marion County Superior Court. The Attorney General has released a statement already that he feels like he is the law of the land as it relates to determining a dispute between units of power in state government. So we'll see how that plays out. We had 1,011 total bills introduced this year, 410 Senate bills, 601 House bills. 100 Senate bills passed and 120 House bills. I'd like to say that that's 23% for the Senate and 20% for the House, so just bringing that up. 92% of those bills received bipartisan support, and 54% of them received unanimous support. So I thought that was really good to see bipartisan support on a lot of the work that we're doing for Hoosiers in the state of Indiana. The budget was historic at the last minute. Our sales tax revenues came in, and we had an extra almost $2 billion to spend. The legislature worked with the governor. I was really proud to see how the governor and the legislature worked together to spend those monies, and I was especially proud to see K through 12 public schools get a very strong increase. Just giving you a quick update there. Schools are looking at $5 billion in new state and federal money. The budget was enough new dollars to raise Indiana's average teacher pay to $60,000 as recommended by the Next Level Teacher Compensation Commission. And that's something that we've struggled with and wanted to fund. Legislature doesn't set teacher pay. We're encouraging school boards to raise their pay. In fact, in this most recent budget, we enacted a portion of that order was indicated that 45% of those monies that came from the state had to go toward teacher pay. So hoping that money will make its way into teachers' salaries. We had a variety of other things that were noteworthy. We reduced our debt by $1 billion, and we used $600 million to pay down teacher pension obligations. So we've made that fund self-sufficient, which I think was a strong move from a longevity perspective. 1123 I just spoke of. That's yet to be seen how that'll play out. I hope it doesn't embarrass us here in Indiana, but it is currently a disagreement. Senate Enrolled Act 5 makes sure local elected officials have a final say on local health orders issued, and it takes it away from the health departments. We've protected religious freedoms with Senate Enrolled Act 263. We've provided liability protection against COVID-19 for governments and businesses. We've got grants to support small business, expansions of telehealth, compassionate visitation for Hoosiers in nursing homes, full funding for schools during the pandemic, up to 100% from 85%. We got some law enforcement reforms. We debated a lot about those. Protected our cities and monuments from rioting, and we've got some pro-life protections. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thanks for giving me a moment to speak, Mr. President.
Any questions for Senator Baldwin?
Just one, Mr. President. Senator, is the holdup on the redistricting Census Bureau data, is that what you're waiting for?
Census Bureau data that it's my understanding is in, but is being held by the federal government.
Held by the federal government.
And we need that, obviously, in order to use those monies to determine what the maps should look like.
Silly question, but is there an explanation why they're holding it?
I won't speculate.
Neither confirm nor deny.
Any other questions for Senator Baldwin?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would just like to thank Senator Baldwin for coming to council meetings on a regular basis and providing us with this update and a very open line of communication back and forth between state and local government. It's not something we've had in the past, and it is greatly appreciated.
That's my job. Thank you.
I think we had one meeting in my previous 12 years, Mr. O'Connor, and now we're seeing you quite frequently, so I like it. Thank you.
Well, if Councilman O'Connor keeps texting me every night during session, I probably should do that.
Oh, he texts all the rest of us too, don't worry.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mayor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. I'll be brief tonight and actually bring really great news. I oftentimes stand in front of you with not great news, but tonight, if you've seen your email, it'll be in the newspaper tomorrow, but Curium, which is a company that purchased Zevicor Molecular, those who've been on the council for a while know Zevacor and the great company that it was. Curium came in and purchased that company. You may recall you met Curium executives last fall when they were in town from St. Louis. Had a great dinner with us and learned more about Noblesville. Well, they are announcing this evening along with us that they are investing about $10 million into their facility here, adding 34 new jobs to the Noblesville facility at average wage of $103,000. So that'll be hitting the paper in the morning. It's been a project that we've been working on. I know the executive or the Economic Development Department and also Council Committee has been well-versed on this, and I appreciate your support and guidance. Andrew Murray, of course, is on vacation this week when we get this news, but he has hustled really hard to get this put together for them, and it's a great collaboration. It's an industry of which we have talked about for years on the med tech arena. They are the world's largest nuclear medicine company, and we're glad to see them expand here in Noblesville, and I think they even have plans for further expansion down the road. So they'll be in front of you here over the next several months to talk about their plans, but I wanted to announce it here first and thank you for all of your support in landing them and helping them grow here in Noblesville. So with that, I end my comments and thank you for your time.
Mayor Jensen, any other comments from citizens that are present? We'll move on to the council committee reports. Park Board.
I do have that, Mr. President. Parks Board met April 14th. Myself and Councilman Schwartz were there. They discussed recreation, a couple of items. They're starting a thing called bird walks. 165 people have registered. I truthfully am not 100% sure what bird walks are, but I think they take a look at birds.
I think it's what it sounds like.
It's just like it is. But 165 people registered. They were really excited about that. They announced beginning in May, all indoor and outdoor facilities are already booked. The carousel served 259 people in the first 2 weeks. Compare that to 2020 when they had 0 people at the carousel in 2020. So 259 in the first 2 weeks. Fox Prairie Golf, all 9-hole layouts are open. The irrigation project is complete. They discussed and they discovered their potential as a resale market for some of the old irrigation parts and pieces that could garner $12,000 to $15,000 in used parts. They're looking for potential buyers for that. The bunker project, they discussed that, and they said the design of that is 85% complete. And the board had a couple action items where they approved the 5-year Parks Master Plan, and they approved an alternative transportation plan that includes 77 miles of new trails. So that was the Parks Board from April 14th.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hampton? None. We will move on to Downtown District Committee.
Thank you. So the Downtown District Committee met on April 19th. Mr. Ayer, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Smith, and myself were present, along with several staff members. We talked through status of funds and a recent sponsorship that has been made for the inaugural Indiana Peony Festival that will be taking place on Saturday, May 22nd at Seminary Park. There's some great people working on putting together this festival and hoping to make Noblesville kind of the peony capital of Indiana. So this is the start of hopefully future festivals in the years to come. There was discussion, of course, about black streetlights in downtown Noblesville.
Thank you.
And the
Couldn't miss
potential.
that.
Could not miss that, no. And the discussion of extending those lights from on Logan Street all the way up to the potential of expanding the border of the downtown district to include the new Nexus project. But because there's going to be work done with those roundabouts along Logan Street, we're going to hold off on really doing anything at this point in time because we don't want to install them and then have things taken away. So that will be working in the future. We talked through the downtown streetscape plan and how the comments from business owners and citizens have been shared with our consultants. They are working to make adjustments and adaptations to that plan, and we'll be getting more information back here very shortly. The council will then meet to discuss that and then bring in our key stakeholders and determine what our next steps are. Downtown activation, alley activation projects. The North Alley is open. The South Alley will reopen once the Levinson project opens up. And so furniture and shade sales will be reinstalled. The East Alley is in progress. And that's really it. So,
Thank you.
Say shade sales,
Shade sales, yes.
big tarps.
Don't say it 3 times.
Provide,
Can you
yeah.
say that
I
quickly
cannot say
3
it 3
times?
times. No.
Any other questions for Counselor Wiles? None. Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met April 22nd. Myself, Mr. Hampton, Mr. O'Connor, Ms. Wiles were in attendance. Chief Matt Mitchell, Noblesville Fire Department, talked about additional appropriation needed to remodel Fire Station 74. Mr. Spalding and Mr. Bears talked appropriation transfer for the nickel plate bond interest payment. Mr. Murray and Ms. Smith discussed the redevelopment commission annual report of activities. Mr. Bears and Mr. Spalding discussed with us quarterly reports of revenues and expenditures. Mr. Bears discussed with us summary of routine appropriation transfers for the quarter, for the first quarter. And Mr. Spalding talked to us about summary of appropriation of grant proceeds for the first quarter. And the claims come to this council with a favorable recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Davis?
Mr. President, I move to approve the claims as submitted.
Second?
A motion and a second to approve the claims. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 9-0. Okay, previously discussed ordinances per the amended agenda. We're going to move on to 260421. Council to consider ordinance 260421, an ordinance to consider a government use overlay, including the adoption of an ordinance and development plan for the construction of a Hamilton County parking garage located at 225 North 9th Street. Joyce Ann Yelton.
Good evening. This item was before you at the last council meeting. As you may recall, the property as shown on the site plan here is north of Clinton Street between 8th and 9th Streets and the alley. It currently is a surface parking lot, which will be revamped to include a 5-story parking garage. They have agreed to basically provide a sidewalk along 8th Street, and that was done at the Plan Commission meeting. And they were seeking a waiver from the minimum height requirement on these 2 end structures, because it's these 2 end structures, again, that contain an elevator and the stairwells that are a little bit above the height that is permitted. Again, this was sent to you from the Plan Commission with a 10-0-0 vote for approval.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Shelton?
Mr. President, just one. Joyce Ann, at the last meeting, I'm not recollecting, but when was the county presuming they were going to start construction? Was it May?
I'm going to turn around
There's Steve.
Mr.
yes,
Wood came on
I was
this
going to
way.
say,
Steve
Mr.
came,
Wood
so I
is
wanted to give
here.
him
Happy to see
I know
Mr.
that
Wood.
Tan Stevenson is here, and so is Sanjay Patel, so
Steve will remember.
Steve Wood, Hamilton County Buildings and Grounds, and thank you for letting us move up, Ms. Peterson.
Thank you.
Yes, we're anticipating May 10th of having a groundbreaking, and then as soon as all permits are taken care of, we'll be breaking ground and going full force to get this done as quick as we can to lessen the downtown congestion.
No, that's great.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
I've heard it, but I haven't heard it officially as to what is kind of the plan for the people moving, trying to get people that are going to park and how they're going to get there.
So that's pretty good, yeah. So obviously, we're losing 3 parking lots, right? We're going to lose the far south lot where the gas station's at in August. We are parking, we've done some repairs at the old Kalo lot that Riverview has. Those 2 lots are going to park there. We're going to shuttle them are staffed by bus back and forth to the buildings. And the big concern is during the wintertime, there's no sidewalk going across to Logan Street, and the sidewalk along Connor Street is very narrow. That's where they throw all their debris at when they plow the roads or heavy rains. So we're going to have transportation a lot. We're hoping a lot of people will walk. A lot of them have been trying it. So that's the plan. And then in August, we'll move that other portion there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hare.
Mayor Jensen, myself, who else? Ms.
Davis.
Wiles and Mr. Davis. The county had a communications meeting with the residents, business owners, building owners, last Monday night?
It's been long, yeah.
I think so. Anyway, we attended that. They did a very good job. It was very open, a lot of good questions from residents and building owners. It was nice to see the way they handled it, and hopefully we will get through this without a lot of issues. I guess on our side, if we have issues, we can just point to Mr.
Yeah.
Wood. And they did pass out his cell phone number.
Yes. And Dan Stevens, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to try as best we can to meet any of the needs. Obviously, it's a construction project. There's going to be issues and stuff. But we're trying to be good neighbors and work with everybody. It's a big change for that area. So our anticipation is we will do the best job we can. We know there's going to be problems, and the meeting was last Wednesday,
Okay. They all
the day of
ran
the
it.
snow.
That's true.
Right, yes.
Anything else for me or Dan Stevens or?
I didn't have a question, it was just a clarification.
Yeah.
I know that last meeting it was kind of up in the air as far as public access on the weekends and after 5.
So that's a discussion for the mayor and the commissioners and probably both councils at the same time. But at this time, there's been no definite what's going to happen, so that talk will be going on. And if there is talk going on, I wouldn't be aware of it. I'm just going to build a building.
I thought there was a statement from
Yeah.
the commissioners that
Yeah.
that it would be open of an evening.
Okay.
And weekend, and they are gonna work through, there's excess parking that's gonna be built with the project, probably around 100 spaces, I believe, if not more.
correct.
And they're gonna try to work that into the mix for use during the daytime hours.
And also
with
the
permits and so forth, but the commissioners, the council wasn't there, but the commissioners were very positive in their approach to it, so.
And we do have the SIDS a lot also. I think there'll probably be discussion about that. But I'm not in that part of it. I'm here to build a building.
Yep.
You're a wise man.
You guys, I will tell you that you guys have been busier than I've ever seen this council, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Any other questions, comments?
President,
Yes.
I would move that we adopt ordinance number 2604-21 as presented.
Second.
There is a motion and a second to approve ordinance 260421. And a second. Ms. Lees, will you call the roll?
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Mr. Boyce,
Aye.
Mr. Davis,
Aye.
Mr. Hampton,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Wiles,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you.
Very much.
Council to consider ordinance 160421, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of the City of Noblesville, Indiana taxable economic development revenue bonds, Series 2021, Washington Business Park, and the lending of the proceeds thereof to Patch Development LLC, and authorizing and approving other actions in respect thereto. Ms. Sarah Reed.
Does it still say Mr. Murray on your
It
agenda?
does.
Sorry.
I always have to look up.
That's a surprise. This evening, tonight before you, you have two ordinances that you heard at your April 13th meeting regarding the issuance of bonds. This particular ordinance, 160421, is with respect to Washington Business Park. Just a reminder, this is a developer purchase bond, and it is for our new business park along State Road 37. The point that we are at in the timeline at this point is the second reading of the bond issuance ordinance, and they are expecting anticipated closing even yet this week, with construction start May 1st, hopefully. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for Ms. Reed? Is there a motion on this item?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would move that we adopt ordinance number 16-04-21 as presented.
Second.
There is a motion to approve ordinance 160421 and a second. Ms. Lees, will you call the roll?
Boyce,
Aye.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Hampton,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Abstain?
Aye, 0 nay, 1 abstention. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. Council to consider ordinance 170421, an ordinance of the Noblesville Common Council authorizing the city of Noblesville, Indiana to issue its taxable economic development revenue bonds, Series 2021A East Bank Project, and taxable junior economic development revenue bonds, Series 2021B East Bank Project, and approving and authorizing other actions in respect thereto. Sarah Reed.
Good evening. Again, same situation with this bond issuance, 1704-21. This is for the East Bank project. We are still in the second reading of the bond issuance ordinance. After this will be an anticipated closing in August and anticipated construction start pretty much immediately after closing.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. President,
Ms. Wiles?
I would move that we approve ordinance number 17-04-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion to approve ordinance 170421 and a second. Ms. Lees, will you call the roll?
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you very much.
Council to 180421, council to consider ordinance 180421, an amendment to a government use overlay to permit a telecommunications service facility on property at 18111 Cumberland Road. Denise Ashelman.
Since your last meeting, the AT&T has continued to meet with the Veterans Group, and they agreed last night to withdraw the application and pursue a different location on school property. So there is a letter that was submitted to the clerk's office this morning that officially withdrew the application. The anticipation is that you will see something again. I believe they said it takes about 6 months of environmental studies before they get to the point that they'd be ready to see you again.
Thank you. No action on this item. Council to consider ordinance 190421, an ordinance to change zoning from county zoning of A2S Agricultural Subdivision District and FH Flood Hazard District for approximately 155 acres to R3 Single Family Residential, R5 Multifamily Residential, and FH Flood Hazard District for the property north of East 166th Street, west of Bowden Road, and south of State Road 38, all in Wayne Township. I'll go ahead and read. Council to consider ordinance 200421, an ordinance to change zoning for approximately 155 acres from R3 Single Family Residential, R5 Multifamily Residential, and FH Flood Hazard District, including the adoption of a preliminary development plan and ordinance to R3, R5, FH, PD for property located north of 166th Street, west of Bowden Road, and south of State Road 38, all in Wayne Township, as amended. After all that work, I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to say something that makes it all not worth it. We received a request from the petitioner this afternoon to continue this item to, I believe it's your May 11th is your next meeting. There is an agreement that we're trying to work out that the details are still being fine-tuned, so they have requested a continuance.
Thank you. No action on that item.
We need a vote to
Oh, wait.
continue it.
I wasn't listening.
Mr. President,
Thank you.
I would move that we continue, I believe that's the correct term, or postpone, sorry, thank you, Ms. Lees. ordinances 19-0421 and 20-04-21 to our May 11th meeting.
Second.
There is a motion and a second to postpone ordinance 190421 and ordinance 200421. This is a hand vote, or no, this is a, no. Okay, this is a hand vote then. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you. I'm so happy we have Ms. Lees, otherwise I would. If we don't say it enough, thank you.
Gotta have the vocabulary.
Council to consider ordinance 210421, an ordinance to amend the zoning commitments for the Noblesville Business Park for property at 9580 East 151st Street. David Herschel.
Yes, good evening. This item was before you at your April 13 meeting. As you know, this is a request to add a distribution business as a permitted use within Noblesville Business Park. That's the ordinance where the establishment ordinance had two contradictory clauses, one encouraging distribution business, one not. So our attempt is to amend ordinance 491297, section 6, to allow distribution businesses in Noblesville Business Park. All other sections of the ordinance to remain the same. Plan Commission recommends approval by unanimous vote to you.
Any questions for Mr. Herschel? None, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. President,
Yeah. Mr. O'Connor.
I would move that we approve ordinance 22-04-21.
No.
Oops, wrong, 21-04-21. As
Second.
submitted.
There is a motion to approve ordinance 210421 and a second. This is a roll call vote. Ms. Lees.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. Council to consider ordinance 220421, an ordinance to change zoning from I-2 heavy industrial to R5 multifamily residential for approximately .28 acres at 1684 Hannibal Street. David Herschel.
Thank you. Again, this was heard on April 13th. This is a request to change the zoning of that property shown as the site from I-2 to R5. As you recall, the 1994 variance allowed construction of that structure to house two units upstairs and a studio downstairs. The current request is to convert the approved first floor studio uses to a third dwelling unit within the building. R5 is the required zoning classification that would allow that. Planning Commission recommends approval by unanimous vote with 3 conditions as included in your staff report. I can read those conditions if you want. But if you've seen them, those 3 conditions are recommended to be attached.
Would anybody like Mr. Herschel to read those?
Yes, please.
Okay, the first one deals with the 1994 BZA case in which a condition was placed that the parking here be set back at least 9 feet from the property line, the western property line. There's been yearly evidence of parking within that setback, so we request, Plan Commission requests that landscaping be installed within that 9-foot setback to preclude further parking close to that residential structure to the west. That's one condition. The second condition relates to this structure here, which appears, you can see it as an accessory structure. It appears to be right on the property line, not meeting the 5-foot required side yard setback. That's a condition to move that to meet that setback. And the third is the applicant takes steps to cause the first floor to be brought up to current building code standards for dwelling unit use. Those are the 3 conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. President, just a clarification for me, there's no anticipated build-out on this at all.
No, what you see is what is proposed. I don't think lot coverage would allow any further build-out, given parking spaces.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. President,
Mr. Ayers.
I move we approve 2204-21 with the three conditions that were imposed at the Plan Commission meeting.
Second.
There's a motion to approve ordinance 220421 and a second. Is a roll call vote.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles. Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council to consider ordinance 230421, an ordinance for special consideration for the operation of a contractor's office in the corporate campus plan development district at 10784 East 141st Street. Joyce Ann Yelton.
The item before you is located on the north side of 141st Street. Okay. Between Howe Road and Promise Road. It's about mid-block. Since 2008, the property has almost continuously been used as a contractor's office. It is a part of the corporate campus. Based in this particular area, it does require a special consideration. We have, in the past, tied that operation specifically to that property owner. In this case, we're not trying to tie it to the property owner, we're tying it to the property so that in the future, if this gentleman goes away and somebody else comes back and wants to do a contractor's office there, that it's basically would be allowable, provided that they meet all the requirements. Again, the applicant is, again, requesting this. The contractor does do roofing mostly and snow removal. The owner proposes to upgrade the structures there, and he's going to fence the area also with a vision block fence. The Plan Commission did send this to you with a favorable recommendation for adoption.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Hilton?
Mr. President,
O'Connor?
I would move that we adopt ordinance 23-04-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance 230421. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles. Aye. Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Hampton.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. Okay, council to consider ordinance 240421, a change of zoning from the land use category of community and sub-district overlays of internal and 146th Street corridor to a land use category of single-family residential with a sub-district overlay of mixed residential, all a part of the corporate campus plan development district for approximately 56 acres west of Maryland Road and north of 141st Street. Also, the council is to consider ordinance 250421, the adoption of a planned development overlay and the ordinance for the land use category of single-family residential with a sub-district category of mixed residential for approximately 56 acres, all a part of the corporate campus plan development district west of Maryland Road and north of 141st Street, as amended. Joyce Ann Yelton.
Ordinance 24, the first ordinance that we talked about, is basically the change of the sub-district from what is known as community, which community does not allow single-family dwellings, to a category of single-family with a sub-district of mixed residential. The second ordinance that we have is basically the adoption of their preliminary development plan. This is a color elevation of that preliminary development plan. And it basically contains 3 different product types. There are 36-foot wide lots, which are the areas that are in the, I'm going to say the lighter color here, the pink. You've got the area here in purple, which are the 50-foot wide lots, and then the lots in yellow are 65-foot wide lots. The area along here where you see all the green is going to remain. There is a legal drain that does go through this property and some wetlands, so all of that is going to remain. Again, these are 36-foot wide lots. They have courtyards, what I'm going to say, in between. This item was before you last month. It was sent to you with a unanimous vote for recommendation as approval. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Matt Skelton, who is representing the owners, to explain I've had a few questions late this afternoon, and I think I'm going to allow Matt to explain those, and then if you've got more questions beyond that, I'll address them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor. With me this evening is Ed Hamilton and Neil Garadia with Apollo Developers, and also Ed Freeman with David Weekly Homes, and I'm going to take this off if you don't mind.
Thank you.
We're here for our, hopefully our final consideration for Maryland Woods. One thing, if anybody's paying especially close attention, I think there was a mistake, your online PUD, and please impute that to my team, not your team. I think the wrong concept plan was in the copy that's online. The copy that she is showing you here is the accurate concept plan, which of course would be included in the ordinance that you would be asked to sign if you see yourself clear to do so. The only comment we received at the last meeting had to do with parking, specifically parking and setbacks, specifically related really to the northern portion of the pink area. And I'll just, this is a little bit bigger. Same plan. And specifically, just for your reference, and I'll mention this again, this is lots 10 through 38, which basically includes this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of townhomes. And specifically, we put together an exhibit that illustratively shows the parking that would be provided, and I've reviewed this with your team, and this works for off-street parking. But specifically, your right-of-way requirements, and believe me, you're going to be really impressed because my art teacher taught me well.
Oh, outstanding.
God rest Opal.
Where's the stick figure?
Yes. Huh? I'm sorry.
The stick figure.
Yeah. So, but this is how the city's right-of-way standards work. So, there's a 28-foot paved surface. You've got 2-foot curbs, gutters. I mean, and then you've got an 11-foot area within the right-of-way. And then on our preliminary development plan, which is a part of the ordinance that you're considering, these lots specifically that are shown in yellow, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, low tech, zoom in, and just show you what we've done. It shows the 54-foot right-of-way of the city, and then outside of that right-of-way, there's a 9-foot drainage and utility easement. And so that forces that 20-foot setback. So if anybody's struggling with how we get to that 20 feet and where the requirement is, it's really baked into your the preliminary development plan that is part of your ordinance. But in speaking with Joyce Ann, she suggested, and I think it's probably good form, a couple of conditions would make this of approval if you are so inclined, would make this neat and tidy. And I've drafted a couple almost equally as professionally as my drawing. But, sorry, I did this out in the atrium. But if you were so inclined, I think this would take care of making it clear that on the 36-foot lots, I mean, I think we've collectively been operating under the assumption that the alley side is the back side of the homes. But under the city's standards, technically that could be considered a front of a home because that's where the right-of-way is. So this makes that clear, this makes that clear. And in addition to that, this lots 10 through 38, which are numbered on your preliminary development plan, making it clear that that rear yard setback outside of the right-of-way is 9 feet. And it is by operation anyway, but this just makes it clear and easy to administer. Other than that, the only change that you should notice to the ordinance, there were a couple of additional commitments identified in the staff report that were architectural in nature that really should have been in there for your last meeting. They just weren't carried over from the ARB and put into the ordinance, so those have been incorporated into the architectural standards now, and they're there for your consideration this evening. So with that, as I mentioned at your last meeting, Apollo is ready to begin work as early as this year. We have reviewed the staff report and are happy with the recommendation that they've made for approval, and we would appreciate your favorable consideration this evening. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
Quick question, so the amendments are really just to clarify that this 9-foot there's no change to the plans and...
There's no change in the plans, and there's really no change in whatever the assumptions everybody's been operating under. I think this just makes it clear so we don't get, when we go to pull a permit, the planning team doesn't have to wrestle with that.
Peterson?
Yeah.
Mr. Skelton, am I looking at the wrong plan here? Because you kind of had me to the point where I thought I was comfortable. So you're going back to what it was before? Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. The one we covered with you at your last meeting is still the plan.
Right,
It hasn't changed.
but we talked about parking, so I thought you rectified it when I saw this.
Yeah, no, what is in the online version is not accurate, and I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Mr. President, just for clarification, Mr. Skelton, can you go back to your artwork?
Sure.
I'm just trying to make sure that,
Kids watching at home should not underestimate what a good art class in high school will do for them.
so you've got the drainage and utility easements 9 feet, then you've got the 11, so that's the 20 feet for the parking that
Correct.
Because it looks like in the bulk standards, that's, I don't know, is it 5 feet, Joey saying?
And so I can clarify a little bit, because that applies to the whole project.
Right,
And so that works for the southern half.
okay.
It's just that's why the 9-foot standard that we're talking about, I mean, it really needs to be in place for that northern portion. I mean, it's already shown in the preliminary development plan, so it's already locked in, but it just memorializes it in the bulk, as a bulk standard, I guess.
Okay,
So it's really two different standards. There's a 9-foot standard for the north half and a 5-foot standard for the south.
For the south.
Yep.
Any other questions? Appreciate you working hard up until the last minute to make this, to listen to the comments and get where,
I'm putting that up in hopes that somebody will use it.
right. We're not currently hiring architects, but, so.
Okay.
Is this part of this proposal now, or is it?
This clarifies what, as I understand it, this clarifies what is in there, memorializes the night. This just makes it,
So these would be amendments to the ordinance.
yes.
So, Ms. Lees, are we able to incorporate this in based upon what Mr. Skelton has provided with us?
Yeah. To amend.
it really
So-
just clarifies what we already know.
And if it's helpful to the council, since we have to resubmit the plan that really belongs in your version, I'm going to have to get that to Joyce Ann anyway, if you'd prefer that this be in the ordinance. We're happy to do that, but if that causes a procedural snag, I think you have the option of doing conditions of approval as well with PUDs.
Or is this amending 24 or 25?
25.
25. 25. So, if there's no other questions, though, I need a motion a motion on ordinance 240421.
Mr. President, I would move we approve ordinance number 2404-21 as presented.
Second. There's a motion to approve and a second on ordinance 240421. Ms. Lees.
Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
Aye, 1 nay. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I would move that we amend ordinance 2504-21 as presented.
Second.
Second. There's a motion to amend ordinance 250421 and a second. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 8, 2, 1.
All against, all
Any
opposed.
opposed? I'm sorry. Opposed? Now it's 8-1.
Mr. President, I would move that we approve ordinance number 2504-21 as amended.
Second.
Your motion to approve ordinance 250421 as amended and a second. Ms. Lees.
Mr. Smith and Mr. Boyce.
Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
8 aye, 1 nay. The ordinance is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Council to consider ordinance 270421, an ordinance to consider a government use overlay, including adoption of ordinance and development plan for the Fire Station 74 at 20777 Hague Road. Joyce Ann Yelton.
This item before you again is to bring Fire Station Number 4 under what is known as the government use overlay. Each time that one of a government use, whether it be a school, the county, or the city project, they add on to an existing building or building a new building, they go through the government use overlay process. So this particular fire station was basically established back in 1995, was there long before the surrounding residential, and has never been upgraded or amended since then. So we're at that point. They are doing two additions. One of the additions would be on the south side of the structure. The other addition is on the west side. There are currently, I think, 3 or 4 parking spaces in this area, and they will be adding additional parking in this area. This actually, when it was originally built, went before the Board of Zoning Appeals, and there were some variances that were granted. Those variances that were granted back in the 1990s will now be incorporated into this overlay ordinance. So going forward, it's just a lot cleaner than having to go back to 2 different bodies. This was sent to you with a favorable recommendation for adoption by a 10-0-0 vote.
Thank you. Any questions? Matt Mitchell is here. Would you like to add anything to the comments? Questions? I would entertain.
Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. O'Connor.
I would move that we approve ordinance 27-04-21 as presented.
Second.
There is a motion to approve ordinance 270421 in a second. Ms. Lees.
Peterson, or excuse me, Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye. Page 3. Council to consider ordinance 280421, an ordinance establishing the American Rescue Plan Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund as amended. Mr. Spalding.
Mr. President, members of the council, Jeff Spalding, CFO and Controller, and the ordinance before you, again, is on second reading, so we discussed it at the last council meeting, and it's pretty basic in that it's just establishing a new fund in city code for receipt of the city's allocation from the American Rescue Plan. Doesn't appropriate anything, just establishes the fund so that when those monies are received, we have a place to manage them from. And then, as referenced here, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, this has been amended, but not for any kind of important operational reason. It's more technical to ensure the references to the existing federal law are correct and ensure that the language that's put in the city code will be functional in the event there are any amendments to that federal law. So that's basically what the amended version is, but still the basic issue here is just creating a new fund.
Any questions for Mr. Spalding? I have a motion to amend the ordinance.
President, I would move that we amend ordinance 2804-21 as presented.
Motion to amend ordinance 280421 as presented in a second. There's a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 9-0. I have a motion to approve the ordinance.
Mr. President, I move to approve ordinance.
Second.
There's a motion to approve ordinance 280421 as amended in a second. Ms. Lees.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay, the ordinance is adopted.
Council to consider ordinance 290421, an ordinance approving the issuance of bonds of the City of Noblesville Redevelopment District for financial assistance to the Nickel Plate Heritage Railroad as amended. Mr. Spalding.
Mr. President, members of the council, again, an item on second reading discussed at the last meeting, and essentially what's happening here is that the Redevelopment Commission has the authority under certain statutes to issue debt, and in the case of this issue where we are seeking to assist the Nickel Plate Heritage Railroad with some financing transactions, the chosen path here is to have the Redevelopment Commission issue the debt, but the council then has to approve the issuance of all debt by any of the various component units of the city. So that's what's happening here. There's a slight amendment to this. I'll talk about that in a second, but also I wanted to reinforce here that this transaction is, as I said at the last meeting, more of a business transaction for the city. We're just acting as a conduit for borrowing, and so we expect this to operate as a business deal. And then that gets to the other language where the overall setup for this financing transaction is one where there is the belief and intent that ultimately revenues from the Nickel Plate Railroad will reimburse the city for any costs of this debt, and that's what the amended language is on the ordinance, is it's referencing a little bit more information about the full nature of the transaction, that there is an expectation that the eventual funding for this will come from the railroad. So with that, I'll take any questions.
It also clarifies that we have a partner in Hamilton County Tourism
Correct.
to help with this as well.
Mr. President, I would move that we amend ordinance 29-04-21 as presented, sorry.
Second.
There's a motion to amend ordinance 290421 as presented in a second. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 9-0.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would move that we approve ordinance 29-04-21 as amended.
Second.
There's a motion to approve ordinance 290421 as amended in a second. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nay, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. New ordinances for discussion. Council to consider ordinance 300421, an ordinance approving additional appropriations in the general fund and establishing a public hearing.
Move to introduce.
Second.
Sam Barris.
Thank you, council members. Sam Barris, Office of Finance and Accounting. This ordinance is the first reading of an additional appropriation of just under $1.4 million. Adding $1.4 million to the fire department's budget to pay for significant renovations to Fire Station 74. That's the fire station referenced by Ms. Yelton earlier in the evening. This would be significant renovations. Our understanding is the goal would be to be able to station 2 additional personnel at this location, which is in alignment with the fire department's kind of long-term emergency service coverage plans. In terms of the funding source for this would be paid out of the general fund. Now, as some of you will remember, or probably all of you will remember, the city received just over $2 million in funding from the Federal CARES Act legislation. That money ultimately reverted to our general fund cash balances at the end of the year. And so the existence of that money is in essence, the funding source for this capital project. And if there's questions about the specifics of the project or what exactly they're doing, I would defer to Chief Mitchell.
Any questions? Sam Barris or Chief Mitchell? Can I have a motion to establish a public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. This is a hand vote. There's a motion to establish a public hearing for May 11th, 2021, and a second. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 9-0. Council to consider receipt of summary of appropriation of first quarter grant proceeds pursuant to Resolution RC 321. Jeff Spaulding.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the council. This is an item that is actually very similar to the next item, but new this year for the first time is we sought your approval for a resolution earlier in the year to handle another version of somewhat routine financial transactions that the council, as the fiscal body, has the authority and requirement to approve, but oftentimes some of the actions are pretty perfunctory, and so the idea here was that rather than run them through one by one, we would establish a process by which these actions occur, OFA executes them, and then we report them to you quarterly. And so in this case, it's regarding grant proceeds, and in most cases with grant proceeds, there are very limited, defined uses of those funds. And so in those cases, as it's laid out in the resolution, when that is the case, when it's very, very specifically defined what the use of the funds are, and that cost has been incurred by a department and they received the grant monies to reimburse that cost, what this resolution basically does is says we can, receive that money and adjust it back into whatever departmental budget was appropriate. So there, to some degree, it's technically appropriating money which resides with you, but in this case, there's not much limit or there's not much discretion you would have in the action anyway. The money's come in, it's only for that use. And so that's basically the purpose of this new resolution. And in this case, for the first quarter, we did receive grant money on actually a second distribution from the CARES Act, but for a variety of reasons, we didn't actually appropriate it back into departmental budgets. So the consequence here is the first quarter for this authority that you granted us was no actions were taken in the first quarter under this, but it wasn't because we didn't receive any grant money. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Spalding? Thank you. Council to consider receipt of summary of fiscally neutral first quarter appropriation transfer pursuant to Resolution RC 221. Sam Barris.
Thank you again, Sam Barris, Office of Finance and Accounting. As mentioned, this is a very similar item to the last one. This is a quarterly report on RC 221, which gives our office authority to make small dollar transfers so long as they do not increase the overall size of the city's budget and as long as they're technical in nature. In this case, there's really not a lot on here. You can see the exact ones in your packet. They add up to less than $25,000, and in this case, they're all for small payroll adjustments, and in each of these cases, the adjustment being made, the person is still making at or below the salary ordinance maximum level. So unless there's any questions, I'll stop there.
Any questions for Mr. Barris? Okay, no action on this item either.
Thank you.
Correct, there's no action.
Council to consider Resolution RC 1621, a resolution regarding the acquisition of real estate. Allison Krupski.
Good evening. So it's kind of small up there, so hopefully you guys can see it. You also have this in your packet, but it highlights the whole parcels that will be impacted due to acquisition, but this is a resolution for land acquisition for our Stony Creek Trail project. This project, I'm sure you all are aware of it. It is a small connection piece that will ultimately connect Stony Creek Road and Clover Road on the west side of State Road 37. It'll travel east, and that's the red. Can you guys see the colors? They're kind of dull. So it'll travel that direction along the red portion, and it'll start heading to the south through the blue portion. It'll go under the bridges at State Road 37 and then continue heading west and tie into the existing Stony Creek Trail on the west side. This project was awarded federal funding through the MPO, and it is scheduled for construction bid letting at the end of 2022. This is the next step in the project for us to keep this project moving, and I recommend we approve this land acquisition resolution. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for the clarity on the exhibits. This is a lot easier to read.
Yeah, we'll be sure to do that in the future, just to help
Just
out.
curious, why is the blue kind of a funny triangle?
Yeah, I thought you'd ask that. So there was just a small remnant, and it was not an economic remnant to leave behind, so we had to acquire all of it.
Thank you.
Economic remnant?
Yes, of the parcel.
Ms. Wiles.
I'll just say that I think that this is a really important project because it finally creates a pedestrian connectivity for residents east of State Road 37. Right now, there's no safe passageway for people to get from the east side of that area into downtown. So excited to have this opportunity for that connection.
Completion will be?
In 2023. There is a chance that this gets moved up. We are ahead of schedule, but obviously it depends on MPO funding and when that becomes available. And they are over-programmed, so the likelihood of it getting moved up I wouldn't get too excited about, but there is that opportunity.
Thank you. Other questions?
I would just move approval of Resolution RC-16-21 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion to approve RC 1621 and a second. There's a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 9-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council to consider report of Redevelopment Commission 2020 activities pursuant to Indiana Code 36-4-14-13 Amy Smith.
Good evening. Before you is a report of the Redevelopment Commission for 2020 activities. This report is submitted to you, to both the mayor's office and the council from the Redevelopment Commission, and also to the Department of Local Government Finance. It is required by statute to be submitted to all three entities. I'm going to just highlight a few of the items in the appendices of the report, and if you have any questions after that, I'm happy to answer them. So Appendix A is a summary of commission details, such as general activities and membership makeup. There are 5 voting members of the commission and 2 non-voting members, one from Noblesville School Board and the other from Hamilton Southeastern School Board. There were 2 new TIF districts created in 2020. That would be for the Lofts on 10th and Promenade, which was pulled out of the Hazeldale district. Appendix B provides a summary of revenue, expenditures, and cash balances by the TIF district. Just a few things to highlight. Increment received in 2020 was $18,957,728, and that is 6.3% higher than the increment received in 2019. Total disbursements in 2020 were $18,264,960, and that is 3.4% higher than 2019 disbursements. And ending cash balance was $12,325,658 for all the TIF districts, and that is 39% higher than the 2019 ending cash balances for the districts. Moving on to, sorry, that was Appendix B, if I skipped that, sorry. Appendix C is a summary of outstanding debt. The total outstanding debt as of December 31st of 2020 is $156,615. Debt service paid with TIF funds in 2020 was $14,674,371. I'm so sorry. And 2 debts expired at the end of 2020. That was in the Stony Creek TIF, and that was for the Taxable Economic Development Bond Series 2013B for LA Fitness, and the Taxable Economic Development Bond Series 2013A Earth Fair, which was in the Hamilton Town Center TIF. Appendix D is a summary of the parcels in each of the TIF districts, and it gives metrics of different assessed values. And it's a parcel by parcel listing by each TIF district. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions?
Mr. President, I don't have a question, but just a comment to Ms. Smith and to the other members of the Economic Development Department. This is a very thorough report and with great information that we haven't seen in this format previously. So thank you very much for the time and energy to get this all put together.
Thanks.
Mr. President, I would echo that and say that with this report, which is somewhat perfunctory because we have to do it every year, but you couple this with the new TIF analysis that we're doing, it really is very transparent for the taxpayer. AAB, it's really it's powerful tools from a cash flow analysis perspective, so it gives us some real depth to work with. So I appreciate all the work that Amy and her team put in on this. There's a tremendous number of parcels involved in all of this, but at the end of the day, this really does provide some detailed information into what we're actually doing. So we need to move on this?
No.
This is just, I didn't think so. But anyway, thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Have a
appreciate
good
the
evening.
effort.
Any other comments, questions? Council to consider transfer TA 0321 and appropriation transfer in the general fund for 2021 bond interest payments for the Nickel Plate Heritage Railroad. Sam Barris.
Thank you, council members. So council has already approved the bond ordinance to issue bonds to provide financial support for the Nickel Plate Heritage Railroad. That's not what this is specifically doing here. The main debt service payments for that bond issuance are to start in 2022. However, there are some interest payments that are due starting this year in 2021. Those total $18,000. So ultimately, 50% of those payments are going to be reimbursed to us by Hamilton County, the way the deal's structured. However, the city has to make those expenditures initially. So this transfers $18,000 to the Department of Economic Development's budget from our contingency appropriations. So this is not adding money to the budget, it's moving money from contingency to economic development to cover those interest payments. And then, as I said, we'll later get reimbursed by the county.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Connor?
I move we approve transfer TA-03-21 as submitted.
Second.
There's a motion to approve transfer TA 0321 in a second. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 9-0. Passes. We are down to council comments. Any council comments?
Motion to adjourn.